I want to thank my advisor, Dr. Isaacs, and my committee, Dr. Feaster and Dr. Toms, for their time and assistance on my thesis. And today I'm going to be talking to you about my thesis, which is titled Feasibility of Real-Time Weed Detection in Turf Grass on an Edge Device. So here's today's agenda. I'm first going to jump into the introduction, which will cover the objectives and my contributions to the literature. I'll then go over the context and motivation. I'll then go through the background, which covers topics relating to my thesis. And then we'll go through the execution of my research through the methods, and then go over results and analysis. And we'll go through the conclusions along with future work. And at the end, there'll be time for questions from the audience. So there are three objectives in my thesis that crystallize the work that I would do. First, I wanted to come up with a robot prototype that would be conducive to future implementations of collecting images in the field. Camera placement, ground sampling distance, and lighting all are variables that should be accounted for in the prototype. Next, I wanted to perform comparative experiments of training multiple types of object detection models, all using fair comparison guidelines. Lastly, I wanted to take those trained models, optimize them, and deploy them to an edge device where inference can be measured and tested for feasibility of running in real time. To summarize, my overall goal is to create a computer vision pipeline where I take a video stream as input, I detect dandelions and localize them with bounding boxes. These predictions would then be the output. And then in future work, this output could be used as an autonomous weeding robot that either uses like micro sprayers to apply herbicide, or it could be used with some type of mechanical removal, like drilling out the taproot of a dandelion. In the picture here, you can see what this output would look like. We have a dandelion that's been detected and localized with a bounding box with 94% confidence. So the goal of research is to make some type of contribution to the literature. And to put into perspective where my contributions are, I wanted to highlight which studies my thesis builds off of. The first published study on weed detection in turf grass using deep learning was done in 2019. They used image classification to detect broadleaf weeds in Bermuda grass. Later that year, the same authors now use object detection to detect broadleaf weeds in ryegrass. They use a DetectNet model and suggested further research should be done using YOLO and SSD models, which is what I've done in my research. Then in 2020, they demonstrated the feasibility of using image classification to detect weedy grasses within Bermuda grass. Now my thesis sits within these studies as it shows the feasibility of using object detection on dandelions, which is a broadleaf weed, in Bermuda grass, which none of them had shown. More importantly, my research extends all of theirs by demonstrating the feasibility of using an object detection model on an edge device that can run in real time. The reason using an edge device is important is because when deploying the model out in the field, you won't be able to just use your standard high-powered server GPU, and instead you must use an energy and resource constrained platform like an edge device. AI solutions are moving out of the server room, and new technology is making it possible for it to be deployed in the field. My last contribution to the research is my data set, which I invested time to collect, clean, and hand label. It also features data collected in a way that controls for ground sampling distance and lighting. This data set will be shared for others interested in similar research as mine. Now my thesis title, Feasibility of Real-Time Weed Detection in Turf Grass on an Edge Device. It's kind of a mouthful and hard to understand the problem. Just so we can all get on the same page here in the beginning, the problem I'm trying to solve is, can artificial intelligence be used to manage weeds and grass? I think it's important to understand why I picked my research topic and know my journey of how I got to this point. I think these are relevant details to any current and future master students listening and who are stuck trying to find a topic or need some motivation. There are three main reasons why for the context of my thesis, which are plants, computer vision, and why it's applied and not theoretical. So my undergraduate degree is in biology, and this was when I was first introduced to the floral domain. After graduating, I got an internship with the National Park Service in San Francisco, and it was here that I got my first hands-on experience working with plants directly and discovering affinity for the work and for plants. And in the pictures here, this is just me at the internship, working with volunteers, working with other interns, and working with other staff. After the internship, I got a job working here in the grounds department at Cal State Channel Islands. I first started in housing, and then after that, I was put in charge of the Long Grade Creek restoration, which runs parallel to Santa Barbara Street. And then I did the native plant installation on University Drive. My last project before I left was the succulent design and installation on the Sierra Hall second floor garden. Throughout my time in grounds, I gained a lot of experience working with plants and discovering problems faced in a grounds department. The reason I chose computer vision for my research is from some key courses I took. Channel Islands offers a couple different courses with opportunities to work on computer vision. A large influence on choosing computer vision for me was taking Comp 546 pattern recognition and Comp 578 data mining. One of my projects where I first got to work with AI in plants was using machine learning to identify tree species on our campus using only images of their bark. Finally, I chose an applied thesis for a couple reasons. Currently, I'm the lab tech for computer science and mechatronics departments where I fix practical problems. My blue-collar job experience and hands-on work also contributed to me wanting to work on research that wasn't just theoretical. Finally, a pattern in my past projects show I like a more tangible type results. These projects include my Santa Rosa Island sensor project, 3D printing projects that use animatronic underpinnings. And even when I had to make an app for software engineering, as Dr. Isaacs mentioned, I was still going outside and taking pictures of plants to use in the app. So now that you know the overall themes of my thesis, which is computer vision in plants, I want to tell you about the motivation for picking the specific problem my research addresses. So remember, the problem I'm trying to address is, can AI be used to manage weeds and turf grass? I was motivated to solve this problem for a couple reasons. I had seen smart and sustainable technology already starting to show up in the ground shop here. First, it started with battery-powered industrial strength landscape equipment, such as hedgers and blowers. Next, we had gotten an autonomous mowing robot, which you can see here, mowing the fields, the soccer field out on University Drive. The problem is no such technology exists to manage weeds and grass. If you want to get rid of the dandelions in your soccer field, you either did it by hand, by manually removing them, or you sprayed them. Creating an AI-based solution for eliminating weeds and turf grass solves a couple key issues. First, it will reduce labor costs or give personnel an opportunity to work on more profitable tasks. It will also reduce supply costs as herbicide use would be highly reduced. The robot would also work on solar and thus be sustainable. Finally, spraying herbicide is always a safety risk, and removing humans or minimizing the amount of human time in that equation is a safer option. Further motivation comes from what's transpired in the research with the ag industry. In 2019, it was rated a $1.1 trillion industry as a whole. There's extensive literature on using computer vision in agriculture as well. One example of something that shows AI in agriculture is last month, Carbon Robotics released their third iteration of their autonomous robotic weeder, and it features 12 cameras and lasers for weed elimination. They didn't give a final price, but they said it costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy. So the ag industry is, doing well, coming along nicely, whereas the landscape industry has sparse research done in computer vision. The landscape industry is valued at $105 billion in 2021. And so the monetary demand is there, but the research is lacking. Where the ag industry is now solving most of its problems with smart solutions, the landscape industry is still highly dependent on manual machinery. Therefore, I thought it'd be a good idea to contribute to the research to solving problems in the landscape industry. So now to get into the background section, I wanted to start first just what are images and what images, how are they represented to computers? And images are simply an array of pixels where each pixel is a value. Here we have a picture of the number 8 that is 22 pixels high by 16 pixels wide. And then in each cell in the array, is the actual pixel value where the value is between 0 and 255. Now, that's for a grayscale image. There's also RGB images, which are color images, and in which case it would be a 22 by 16 by 3 array. So it's 3 channels deep for each for the red, green, and the blue. A common operation computers perform on images when dealing with computer vision is called convolutions. A convolution is when a kernel, which is simply a much smaller image, is used to take the dot product on the image that you're convolving. As you can see in the animation, the kernel is the 3 by 3 array, and it slides over the input image where the output of all the products in the kernel with where the kernel is aligned with the input image. And this output is commonly referred to as a feature map in computer vision. Convolutions have been used extensively in computer vision, and for example, they're used to sharpen and blur images, as well as detect or find image edges in images. My thesis uses deep learning to solve its problem. Deep learning is a subfield of artificial intelligence that solves complex problems with large amounts of data using artificial neural networks. These artificial neural networks are inspired by the functionality of our brain. The network has an input, it then has hidden layers and an output or outputs. Each neuron represents a function and each connection represents a weight. The network is taught by adjusting these weight values through a process called backpropagation so that the output resembles that of the training data. Deep learning really has revolutionized the computer vision field. Previously, the best traditional image processing and machine learning techniques were achieving 80 to 90% accuracy, and now deep learning solutions are achieving up to 99% accuracy on complex data sets. When using images as data, a special type of neural network is used called a convolutional neural network. It takes images as input and uses kernels, as described earlier, to convolve and produce a feature map in the next layer. These kernels are considered the weights in the network and are what is updated when the network is trained. As you can see in the picture, we have a 448 by 448 by 3 RGB, it's a color image, is used, and it has a 7 by 7 kernel to perform the convolution. Each layer, each of these is a convolution layer, and in each of these with the kernels, you can have many kernels, which the more kernels it has makes the network more complex. The kernel in the first layer is 7 by 7. And as you can see in the resulting tensor in the next layer, it has a depth of 192. This means there was 192 7 by 7 kernels, each with different weight values inside of it, that convolved with the input image to produce 192 feature maps that are stacked on top of each other. As you progress through the CNN, through each convolutional layer, eventually you'll get to a fully connected layer and then an output layer to make your prediction. In my thesis, I used computer vision technique called object detection. With object detection, two things are being accomplished: classification and localization. Classification is telling what is in the image, while localization is telling you where that image is and where that object is in the image using bounding boxes. In the picture with the stop sign, you can see the red bounding box, which is where the model predicted the stop sign is, while the green box is where the actual stop sign is. As there is a high overlap between the boxes, this means it was a successful prediction. The main object detection architecture I use in my thesis is called YOLO, known as you only look once. It is called this because it is a single stage detector, meaning it only has to do one forward pass through the network to make a detection. Being a single stage detector means it is very fast, and along with its accuracy, makes it a state-of-the-art detector. Currently, there's 5 iterations of YOLO. The original YOLO came out in 2016 by Joseph Redman, and later that year, he released an improved version that where he achieved better accuracy by introducing anchor boxes, variable resolution input, and batch normalization. In 2018, he released YOLO v3 with novel improvements that further increase accuracy and speed. In 2020, Alex Bokovisky released his paper on YOLO v4, which introduced bag of freebies and bag of special techniques that further improved accuracy with minimal effect to speed. Within a couple of months of the YOLO 4 being released, Glenn Jocher released his own version, which he called YOLO v5. YOLO also has many variants, such as tiny, small, multi-scale, and ones that feature different feature extractor backbones, which I'll explain in the next slide. YOLO can also be trained on a variety of platforms, such as Darknet, PyTorch, and TensorFlow. The choice of platform usually comes about because either the author created it or the demand was there to include YOLO in that platform. For example, Darknet was the creation of Redmond and is used natively for the first 4 versions of YOLO, whereas Jocher used PyTorch for his implementation, as it's a much easier platform to train on with less dependencies, and it does not need to be built from source. Since YOLO is used prominently in my thesis, I wanted to give a little more detail about how it works. So the YOLO network consists of an input, a feature extractor backbone, a neck, and detection heads. The input is simply the image being fed into the network. The backbone is where features are extracted through convolutions. The neck is where feature maps are collected from downstream and upstream routes. And the detection heads are where class scores and bounding box predictions are made, which you can see with these little red boxes here. That's where the bounding box predictions are made. You can see that detection happens all in one forward pass, hence the name You Only Look Once. Now, YOLO can have a single detection head, or it can have up to 6 or more. The more detection heads means the model will perform better at detecting objects of varying sizes. The standard YOLO v3, v4, and v5 models all use 3 detection heads by default, which is why you see the 3 boxes here. 2 other object detectors used in my thesis are single-shot multi-box detector, also known as SSD, and faster FRCNN, where R stands for region. SSD, like YOLO, is a single-stage detector and is very fast. It produces feature maps at multiple scales and uses filters to then make bounding box predictions. The version of SSD I evaluated uses the MobileNet backbone, which is a lightweight feature extractor backbone designed to run on mobile devices, which makes it even faster. Faster FRCNN is a 2-stage detector that favors accuracy over speed. It uses a region and proposal network on its feature maps, which is then passed to a classifier in the 2nd stage. The 2-stage process makes it more accurate, but it suffers in speed compared to YOLO and SSD. So there are a couple of key metrics that are measured in object detectors. In my thesis, I measured mean average precision at 0.5, which I'll discuss shortly, recall, and inference speed. To understand map at mean average precision at 0.5, you first need to understand precision, which I'll explain in the context of my thesis. Precision is the measure of how well a detector is successful at detecting weeds when it actually attempts a prediction. It is a number of true positives out of the number of true positives plus false positives. Average precision is the area under the precision recall curve, and mean average precision is the mean of all the average precision values for each class being evaluated. Now, the 0.5 value comes into play as a percentage, in this case 50%, as a percentage of overlap that must be met between the predicted bounding box and the ground truth bounding box. This overlap is known as intersection over the union, and in order for a prediction to count as a true positive, at least 50% of the predicted bounding box must overlap with the ground truth bounding box. I mentioned earlier that the stop sign prediction was successful. It was a true positive because, as you can see, more than 50% of the red box overlaps with the green box. So for recall, recall is a measure of how well a detector successfully detects weeds out of the total weeds available to be detected. Finally, inference speed measures the end-to-end latency for the time an image is taken as input to when a prediction is made, and it is typically measured in frames per second or milliseconds. In order to get an object detector to run in real time on a resource-constrained edge device, there are a couple key factors to consider. First, you can alter the depth of the network, which means increasing the number of layers. You could also increase the width of the network by increasing the number of kernels used in each convolutional layer. These both can lead to higher accuracy, as it is potentially learning more features to discriminate on. Newer architecture technologies, such as creating a cross-stage partial network, can also help increase accuracy. Now, it's It's an observed phenomenon in object detection that models follow a Pareto optimality curve, where positive effects in accuracy or precision causes a negative response in speed, and vice versa. This can be seen in this graph here. This graph is from YOLO v5, where the x-axis is the inference speed and the y-axis is precision. COCO AP val just means it's the average precision the models we're getting on the Microsoft COCO dataset. Now, if you look at the red line, it's we have the YOLO v5 extra large model, and it has the highest accuracy, with accuracy at the top here, but it has the slowest speed. For speed, faster, the lower is faster because it's measured in milliseconds, not FPS. And then the converse is true for YOLO v5 small. It has the fastest speed. It has the fastest speed, but the lowest accuracy of the YOLO v5 models. So there are a couple ways to keep complexity in a network, but also increase speed or keep speed the same. First, you can offload all matrix type calculations to a GPU, which can lead to significant gains of speed due to parallelization. Training and inference platforms now take advantage of CUDA-enabled GPUs to do this. Another option to speed up inference is quantization. Quantizing a model means you reduce its precision from floating point 32-bit to floating point 16-bit or integer 8. You don't reduce its precision. You go from floating point 32-bit and then you reduce down to floating point 16-bit or further to integer 8-bit. This technique reduces the number of cache accesses by allowing 2 times the amount of data to fit in the same cache line, assuming you're going from floating point 32 to floating point 16-bit. So while an edge device has a different definition in networking, in the context of computer vision, an edge device is a single board computer that is generally compact, power efficient, and specialized in its use. One you guys are probably most familiar with is the Raspberry Pi. There's also the Jetson Nano from nVidia, which has a CUDA-enabled GPU. And then another popular edge device is the Google Coral, this one with the dev board, which uses a TPU coprocessor to speed up machine learning and deep learning operations. Well, I would have liked to evaluated all 3 edge devices. In the end, I chose the Jetson Nano for affordability. It was only $99, and for the fact it had a CUDA-enabled GPU with 128 cores on it. Also want to highlight the type of plants investigated in this thesis. The particular weed I was interested in detecting are dandelions. They are highly invasive and common across the United States in lawns. It has a strong taproot, which means even if you mow them down, they're going to regenerate. They're also perennial, which means they'll come back each year if you don't fully kill them off. The type of turf grass that I used and investigated with dandelions growing in it was called Bermuda grass. And it's one of the most popular types of grasses seen in the landscape industry. It's so popular because it can be cut below 1 inch, meaning it will provide a nice level surface, and it looks great too. It also self-repairs when it gets damaged. Okay, so jumping into the methods now. This is the prototype I used to simulate in situ image capture in the field. It consists of a Raspberry Pi high quality camera, a power bank, and an LED ring light. What's important here is the way it captures images using a light that provides constant illumination. Having the same illumination across your data set makes it more robust. It also means that the future robot implementation could be run at night, as it will not depend on sunlight. I just want you to notice here the bird's eye view of the lens placement. It's placed directly on top, and then the ring light within is placed around that lens. And then here in the bottom left, we have the Raspberry Pi high quality camera here with the lens attached, and then it's attached to the Raspberry Pi with a case. And here it is sitting on top with the power bank. Data was collected using the robot prototype at Pleasant Valley Fields, which is just down the street. It has Bermuda grass. That's what it fully uses in all 12 of its soccer fields. And there was plenty of dandelions to capture there as well. I collected images across multiple days this past winter. And to take pictures, I tethered the Raspberry Pi and my laptop to my phone, and then used VNC to access the Pi and run an image capturing app. So that's how I captured the images, and my data set now consists of dandelions and background, where background means no dandelions are present. So the top two images are labeled as dandelion or weed, and because they have the dandelion in it, and then the bottom two are labeled as background because it's just the Bermuda grass. It was a balanced data set where half were dandelions and half were background. A total of 1,714 images were taken. I made sure to take pictures of dandelions at varying growth stages, from only having 2 leaves all the way up to its flowering stage. I used a 640 by 640 capture resolution, and the ground sampling distance was 2.8 pixels per centimeter. The reason I use 640 is because it's a multiple of 32, which is required for YOLO networks, and then 640 seemed to be the highest resolution in the research that that I could possibly achieve real-time inference speed. In object detection, training data must have ground truth labels. I did this by hand for my data set. I also did augmentation, which is where you alter your data in a way to prevent the model from overfitting. Overfitting is when a model starts to memorize the training data too much and then performs poorly on unseen data. Augmentation is also helpful in artificially creating real-world scenarios that the detector might encounter. I perform 4 types of augmentation to my data, which includes flips, rotations, and blurring to remove noise. After all these augmentations, my data set was now 4,285 images. Okay, so now my data set's been captured and prepped and labeled, and now it's time for training. All training was done using transfer learning, where the weights that were tuned on a much larger data set were imported into my models. I trained on 3 different platforms: Darknet, PyTorch, and nVidia's transfer learning toolkit. Within each of these platforms, I tuned and trained specific models. For Darknet, this was YOLO v4, the standard model, which I used as a baseline in my evaluations. I then modified a version of YOLO v4 Tiny by adding an extra detection head to it, which is now called YOLO v4 Tiny 3L. In PyTorch, I trained a YOLO v5 small model, and in TLT, I trained a YOLO v4 Tiny derivative, an SSD detector, and a faster FRCNN detector. The resolutions I trained at for each are 320, 416, and 640. The reason I trained on different platforms is due to library incompatibilities and lack of implementation of certain models in these platforms. For example, YOLO v5 is the newest of the models, and it currently can only be trained in PyTorch. Also, the creator of YOLO v5 implemented it in PyTorch specifically due to its ease of use. So recall that inference speed is the measurement of how quickly an image is taken as input to when a detection is made. It is performed on the edge device, and in my case, it's performed on the Jetson Nano. I tested inference on 4 different platforms: Darknet, PyTorch, Deepstream, nVidia Deepstream, and a specialized library called tkDNN. tkDNN is purported to speed up inference on Jetson-based devices, which is what I was using for this thesis. Deepstream is NVIDIA's production-ready inference platform that accepts a variety of models and formats. Performing inference involved exporting the model weights, quantizing them, and then deploying the final model, a serialized engine, to the Jetson Nano, and running them on unseen data. Like in the last slide, library incompatibilities and lack of implementation is why I use 4 different platforms. And for example, it's why I couldn't run inference on YOLO. Why I couldn't run inference on YOLO v5 and tkDNN is because YOLO v5 is so new and it just isn't supported in tkDNN at this time. So this is a lot to take in on this slide, but I feel like it is important to show I did my due diligence in evaluation. In reading many papers on object detection, I noticed many times researchers didn't do their best to provide fair comparison when evaluating metrics. Either they failed to recognize its importance or simply abstracted away these details in their paper. For me, I wanted to be fair, so I kept some details constant across all trainings and inference. I trained at the same resolution for each model. I trained on the same data set for each model. I measured accuracy on the same validation set. Not accuracy, I measured precision and recall on the same validation set. The weights I used for transfer learning were all trained on the same larger MS COCO data set. I use the same stochastic gradient descent optimizer for training, and I train for the same number of epochs. I use only FPS for inference speed and don't include any speed results in milliseconds, which can be confusing because when you use FPS, higher is better, and with milliseconds, lower is better. For inference, I use the same batch size of 1. I use the same FP16 quantization. I also include pre and post-processing latency in my inference measurements. I also use the same backbone feature extractor in my YOLO models, which is Darknet. Also across all YOLO models, I use the same number of detection heads. Finally, when measuring inference, I use the same video file across all models. Okay, so we're at the results now. This is my results table. It's a lot to take in, and I'll put up a graph next that's going to summarize it better, but where I can analyze it better. But here, I just wanted to summarize what's in the table. So overall, I evaluated 26 models here. There's 26 models. It contains 3 different training resolutions. It shows the 3 training platforms I used. It shows the 4 inferencing platforms I used. It shows the final model size, the mean average precision at 0.5, which means at least 50% overlap with the bounding boxes resulted in a true positive. It shows recall, and then finally it shows FPS, which is the inference speed I was interested in. So here's that table, but now graphed with FPS, which is inference speed on the x-axis, and mean average precision on the y-axis. Each line represents the same model, but at differing training resolutions. So for example, this brown line up here is the YOLO V5 small model with measurements at 320, 416, and 640 resolution. In this graph, the ideal object detector would exist in the upper right quadrant. This means it's going to be showing that it's highly accurate and that it has fast inference speed. So now let's do some analysis here on the graph. There's some interesting trends to point out on this graph. The first thing I wanted to show you was the faster FRCNN model. And even at 320 resolution, it could barely achieve 1 frame per second on the Jetson Nano. Evaluating a 2-stage detector like faster FRCNN, I was expecting it to be slow, but it was really surprising how slow it was. Second, we have, let me click through here. We have the YOLO V4 standard models, which also showed poor inference speed. This was expected as it was the standard model, which is fairly large, and I evaluated them for reference for the following smaller models. So in this graph, 6 models were able to achieve real-time performance, but 2 models stood out. And those were YOLO V5 small and YOLO V4 tiny 3L, both at 320 resolution. You'll notice this one as well. This is the SSD model at 320 resolution, but it didn't stand out because for the same speed, YOLO V5 small was, YOLO V5 small was more accurate. One thing I do want to point out in this graph is that the minimum on the y-axis is not at 0, it's at 0.75. So the difference in accuracy between these 2 optimal models is not as drastic as it looks. There's only a 12% difference in accuracy from YOLO V5 small to YOLO V4 tiny. Whereas on the x-axis for speed, it does start at 0. So the magnitude, the difference in speed between the YOLO V4 and tiny and YOLO V5 small is that YOLO V4 tiny is 20% faster. Okay, now I want to talk about the different inference platforms and how they performed. First, we have PyTorch, which achieved great accuracy. It's high in accuracy, but it had poor speed. Then there is, let's see, Darknet, which did slightly better in speed, but still managed to only reach 16 frames per second in its smallest model at 320 resolution. Next, we have tkDNN, the library that's supposed to speed up inference times on Jetson products. And while it does show that it can reach real-time inference with its 320 resolution model, you can see here in the next one that Deepstream proved to be the superior inference platform, having achieved the highest accuracy and fastest inference speed. So I believe Deepstream performed the best because it was optimized for CUDA-enabled devices such as the Jetson Nano, as well as all models undergoing quantization from NVIDIA's TensorRT library. Another interesting trend in this graph is how there's a dip in my models at 640 resolution. Recall from the YOLO Pareto optimal graph I showed earlier, which demonstrates the phenomenon that as resolution increases, so does accuracy. But going from 416 to 640 resolution, so we start at 416, and then going to a 640 resolution in my models, they decrease in accuracy. And I attribute this dip to a lack of complexity and number of classes in my data set. My data set only has one class and images are fairly consistent, whereas models in the Pareto graph, the YOLO v5 Pareto graph that you saw earlier, they were all trained on a very complex data set with over 100,000 images, 80 classes, and the images all contain complex backgrounds. So I can't show you the prediction results for all 26 models, but I want to highlight the one model that stood out, which is YOLO v5 small at 320 resolution. You can see that there are 8 images here of dandelions and 8 images of backgrounds. Notice how in the background images, there were no false positives. And in the images with dandelion, all were successfully detected. So they're all true positives with at least 80% confidence. Next, I have a video using the YOLO v5 small model. It's at 416 resolution, not 320 though. And it's showing detections of 2 dandelions in Bermuda grass. The robot prototype is moving at about 1 foot per second, and the video is being processed at 26 frames per second. So there's the first detection there, and the next detection right there. Okay, so in my thesis, I was able to demonstrate it is feasible to detect weeds in real time. Hooray. In Bermuda grass using an edge device. I did this by collecting my own data with a robot prototype, augmenting the data, and then training it with multiple models on multiple platforms. These models were optimized to increase speed and accuracy. They were all evaluated as fairly as possible by keeping as many variables constant across training and inference. 2 models proved to be the most viable in terms of accuracy and speed, and achieved real-time performance, and that was YOLO v5 small and YOLO v4 tiny 3L. There are a few reasons why I believe I achieve real-time performance in some of my models on an edge device, which is, as you know, energy constrained, resource constrained. First, using lightweight models with less layers and kernels means less calculations overall when making a forward pass through the network. Second, quantization to a lower precision, specifically floating point 16-bit, had a huge impact on increasing speed with minimal accuracy loss. Third, using an edge device with a GPU is critical if speed is important. Specifically, the Jetson Nano had a CUDA-enabled GPU that allowed general purpose matrix calculations to be offloaded to it. So now that I've done the legwork for the computer vision pipeline and shown real-time weed detection is possible using AI, the most obvious future work that builds upon my thesis is the implementation of a weeding robot, using an autonomous weeding robot. Using the detected weeds as input, you can employ precision sprayers or create some type of mechanical weeder on the robot that drills out the taproot. Another option for future work is to use something called model pruning to increase inference speed. Model pruning is where you can prune off nodes or, aka neurons in your network that are redundant. And then in addition, you could also use OpenMP, which is a parallelization library for CPUs. And it could be used to speed up the pre and post-processing steps in the computer vision pipeline. Finally, collecting more data on different weed species could create a more robust data set. Dandelions are just one of many weeds found in turfgrass, and any future robot implementations would need to be able to handle those weeds as well. And one such weed is here that's very common in grass across the United States is clover. And that's it. Now it's time for questions from the audience.